Welcome back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This is episode number 29, where we will be reviewing the 2020 film El Hoyo, aka, even though this isn't a direct translation, platform, which was I think it was a Netflix produced film, or did they just pick up the rights?
I think they just picked up the rights because remember when we saw the beginning of
Yeah,
the film, you think like the Spanish government, the
that's
Basque
right.
government.
I'm reading it right here. It's a Basque Films production. So this movie um, is pretty much from a Basque production studio. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that's a region of northern Spain and part of France as well. They're part of the Basque people. But this is a very interesting film that we'll get into. I'll try to give somewhat of a quick synopsis. But essentially, when you're first introduced to the main character of the film, whose name is Goreng,
Golden.
he, you're introduced to this character who's in what looks like a prison cell, but in the middle of the cell, there's just a hole there in the middle of the floor, and it's in the center. But if you look above, there's also a hole in the ceiling, and you just see it go continuous holes in each floor for many, many floors above and many, many floors below. And Goreng is not quite sure what is essentially going on, but this sort of building that has many holes, or like essentially has continuous holes on each floor, is known as the pit. And Goreng has a roommate whose name is Tsuremagasi, and Tsuremagasi has informed essentially Goreng that he has been in the pit for quite a while. You don't know exactly how long, but it is revealed that each character has been allowed to bring one item with them into the pit. Tsuremagasi has chosen to bring with him a self-sharpening knife, whereas Goreng, the main character, chose to bring a copy of Don Quixote, which it has been sort of revealed later on that no one has ever brought a book into the pit. You know, usually people bring weapons. So you know that this is sort of a dangerous place. And so little by little, it is revealed that there are certain rules to the pit in order to survive. So initially they are on, I think, floor number 48. So it is not revealed to you, the audience member, how many floors are in the pit. And so it is sort of for you to sort of figure out. Now, what ends up happening is once you survive, I believe it's a month or several months long on the floor, you are then one night essentially knocked out, and you are reshuffled onto a different floor of the pit. So they are rescatter you. And so then you wake up one day and say you're on floor number 48. The next day you're on floor number whatever you can think of, floor number 100. And where this becomes an issue is that if you're on one of the top floors of the pit, you essentially have your first dibs of this buffet of food that is on the platform. And so what ends up happening is a platform containing a whole lot of food will go from one floor to the next floor, and you have a set amount of time to eat whatever you want to. The one rule is you are not allowed to keep any food for later. Otherwise, the room will either become insanely cold or insanely hot until you drop the food out. So that's one of the big rules. Now, what's interesting, and one of the first key events, is you're introduced to this character of a bloodied woman named Miharu. And Miharu becomes very important because essentially she's just on this moving platform, and you've been told that she is searching for her lost child. And Goreng is really surprised about that, but one of the key moments of this is he shows her a bit of compassion. And so that becomes sort of important later on in the film. Now, as the platform goes down, you see Miharu continue to go down. And at one scene, I think she's either a floor or two below Goreng's floor. He looks down and is horrified because these two men are basically pull Miharu off of the platform and it is insinuated that they have their way with her. Except in the very next scene, you just hear men screams, and then you see Miharu bloodied up go back onto the platform, and insinuated that she just slaughtered them, essentially. So it's not someone that you really want to mess with. Now, the Tramagasi, who's the roommate, explains some of the rules and as they go along. But then one night when essentially fill all the rooms with some sort of sleeping gas, and that signals that they're going to change, going to be on a new floor the next day. Goran wakes up and he realizes he is completely tied up by Tramagasi. And he says, essentially what he tells him, he's like, I'm not going to kill you now. And he's like, but I've tied you up so that you won't spoil. Basically insinuating that he's going to cannibalize him. And he's like, not that I want to. He's like, we've just woken up on a floor that's so low. And one of the big things is the lower on the floor you get, the less likely you are, it's going to be the chance that you are going to have any food on the platform, because people are sort of animals or savages, and they don't just take what they want. They overeat and over excess, because for people who have been on lower floors, once they get to like a higher floor, they're hungry, and they'll be like, well, people at the top have screwed us previously and not left us any food as the platform gets lower. So we're just going to do what they had done and just eat exorbitant amounts of food. And so at this point, Gordon's freaked out because he's tied up. He can't move, and he thinks that he kind of realizes this is his end. But at one day where it's sometime in the middle of the month, and Tramagasi is basically about to slaughter him, you see the platform come down with Miharu on it, and she comes and kills, or she injures Tramagasi, and she essentially cuts Gordon free, and he just brutally kills Tramagasi. And at this point, then, I believe Miharu goes down back onto the platform, and you don't see her again for a while, but Miharu saved his life. And I don't know if you have a different interpretation, but I believe it's because he's one of the only people that's ever shown her any kindness on the while she was on the platform. And so after a while, essentially, Goren survives the month, and he's reshuffled to another floor. Then what ends up happening is Gordon wakes up with another roommate whose name is Imo Guiri. Imo Kuwaiti. I'm just going to call her Imo for now.
It's Imo. It's because a lot of these names I've noticed
are Basque.
Yeah, so I think the right pronunciation is Imoguri.
Imoguri?
Yeah, that okay. It's the U is there, but you can ignore a little bit of the I. Yeah.
Imoguri. Okay. Yeah. So her name's Imoguri. Gordon wakes up for her. It's his new roommate on the 33rd floor. And she chooses to bring her dog, which Gordon slowly realizes, this is stupid. And so what you realize with Gordon is that, a lot of his sort of innocence is sort of being stripped away. He's being desensitized the longer he's been on the platform, because he sees a lot. But Imoguri is there with her very, I would say, she has her like crazy idealistic and unrealistic expectations, where she is a bureaucrat who thinks that she's can change things. And so what she tries to do is she tries to convince, everyone, if you only take what you need in these little plates, then there will be enough food for everyone on the floor. But she's also informed Goren that, the bureaucracy is not bad. There's only 200 floors, which is, you will find out is not entirely true, that the organization she worked for is not entirely truthful for her later on. But what ends up happening is that little by little, essentially Imoguri starts to realize how wrong she is by certain things, and that her naive approach to trying to get people to change won't work. And so Goren basically tells the floor below at one point when they won't abide by Imoguri's, suggestions, that if they don't just take what she eats on the plate, the next time he will just poo all over the food, and so they won't be able to eat anything. And so basically that forced coercion gets them to abide by her wishes. And so it's interesting. And then it's later on revealed that she had terminal cancer. Right. And so that's why she chose to get into the hole, because this is sort of her to try to, do something good with her life. But at one point, Miyahuri, on one day, is shown to be on the platform very injured. And so both Goren and Imoguri try to nurse her back to health. And at one point, you just see Imoguri, or like at one night, Miharu takes Imoguri's dog and kills it, slaughters it, right? And it's not done for any reason. But then when the platform comes, Miharu gets on it, and Goren, unaware that Imoguri knows anything about Miharu, tells her, she goes onto the platform all the time in search of her lost kid. Then Imoguri informs him, no, I've screened her. She doesn't have a kid. Some people are just crazy, essentially. And so that's when that sort of horrifying realization comes to the audience member. But what ends up happening is they survive, and then they're due for another reshuffling, so they wake up, and they wake up on floor number 202. And at that point, you see that Imoguri has hung herself, because the organization has lied to her that there were more than 200 floors. And so they're able to survive once again for the, I'm sorry, Goran is able to survive that next month again, and he's reshuffled, and he has a new roommate whose name is Baharat. And this guy is sort of biblical. He is trying to convince people to get to the top so that he can be sort of this messiah figure and try to save everyone. Except the people above really just look at him as a crazy person, and they treat him badly, and they actually poop on him. Just showing sort of the horrific nature of some individuals. And so what ends up happening is Goren ends up convincing him that, in order to really change things, they need to divvy up and go on the platform by force. So they go onto the platform, and they give people some food out to try to protect all those at the floors below who don't usually get food. But as they start to realize, as they go lower and lower, not only are the people at the top acting horribly, but the people who are at the lower levels are acting very brutally as well. And so then they realize, it's just something that's rotten with the whole structure, kind of like an allegory at society in a way. But what they end up doing is, after a lot of events, they end up reaching the bottom floor, which is floor number 333. At that point, they see a child who's they believe is Miharu's child. And the one other thing I forgot to mention is that on their descension to one of the floors, they're basically told, the way to send a message to the people at the top is to keep a piece of food just pristine that has not been eaten, to show that we're not complete savages. Meaning that, yeah, though you would expect all the food to be gone, but once the platform returns to the top, if there's this piece of, dessert, then that will send a message to them. And what message, you're not quite sure, but basically shows, we're going to coordinate, and we're not going to abide by the foolish rules that you've subjected all of us to. And I forgot, it was like a piece of tiramisu. I can't remember the exact dessert, but they tried to preserve this piece during their entire descension down, until they get to the point where they reach the bottom floor, and obviously the kid looks very hungry, so they decide to give her, the piece of pastry. And then they realize, so the dessert was actually a panna cotta, which was supposed to be their message. But then they sort of realize that after a while, the girl is the message. And so they put her on the platform, and essentially both of the main characters die. They walk off, and they just see your last scene is just the girl rising on the platform up on her way to the top, and the movie cuts out. So sorry for that long synopsis, but there was like a lot that sort of went on within that film. But I wanted to ask you about your thoughts, Chris, on the film.
Yeah, I thought the film was well crafted. I like the allegory aspect of this movie. There's a lot of points of debate in this film about like the ending and some of the symbolism. But just talking about stuff that I think is more concrete. So I thought, well, yeah, I thought the transition, Goran's transition at the movie was very well done, right? Because he comes in with his own ideals, right? Like he's gonna bring the book thinking like he'll just kill time with reading it, right? Because I think he mentions earlier that he's like his favorite book, and like it represents. And I think because this movie is it's a Basque film, but it's in the context of Spanish cinema. It's well known that like Don Quixote is considered like the Spanish book. Like if you want to understand, like
arguably the greatest book written
yeah,
by some literary historians.
yeah, and if we go full deeper with the analogy of using allegory to tell stories, that book is in many ways an
It's a
allegory to tell.
modern day Don Quixote story. Is
Yeah,
what they were trying to get at.
and the movie too is as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I thought the concept of the platform, the platform, the food going down up was really interesting, and also the levels, being random in a sense. I
Mm-hmm.
found out to be a message of like, just because you're at the top and you think you're at the top because of your own merits, there is a
But
part of
they did say there are at the beginning of the movie they started off by saying there are three types of people in this world. There are those at the top, those at the bottom, and those that fall. Y los que caen. And I thought that was a very good way of sort of setting the stage for the movie.
Yeah, because the movie is like under, I think supposedly, because you look at this like like the categorization on like like IMDb or something, it's like horror thriller. It's not your traditional horror thriller type movie.
It's not. They're not going to get you on a lot of jumps. It's more
Yeah,
that slow burn realization of you're in a horrible setting.
exactly. And also you do a lot of self-reflection, I think, around the world around you as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, yeah, like I said, the movie was well constructed. And I did like especially like let's say like the first half of the film, I thought was very strong. I think the second half was good as well, but you could tell maybe they were rushing a little bit because I thought like the whole. So you mentioned earlier in your synopsis summary, when they decide to go down right and distribute the food, Goran and Barahat, sorry. You can make an inference or like a mental connection that they are doing basically what the far left or far right would want to do, right? Like forcibly redistribute
Food.
Resources or
Mm-hmm.
here in this sense it's food, but like resources or wealth, right? And you see that there's a trade-off, right? They're able to like letting it, let it run wild like before, right? We saw like in the movie shows you this very well, right? That people at the top are overeating and the people at the middle are everybody's trying to overeat. So by the time it gets to a certain level, like
I
the food
wouldn't.
never gets that far, right?
I'm not so sure that the people at the top are necessarily overeating, but the people, because they know they're going to get food all the time, so there's no worry for them necessarily. But I think once you get off that initial upper tier, that's when people start to engorge.
Yeah. And so you see that the food never gets really, I guess it doesn't get as far as like when they decide to actually, they run out eventually. They're realizing that their estimation was wrong. Like Goran thinks there's 250, but there
Yeah,
was like
333.
which is that's
Which,
another nine.
if you multiply that by 2, since there's 2 roommates, there's 666. Essentially saying this is kind of like hell.
Exactly. So even they make the miscalculation that there is enough even to go all the way down there, because in the end they really don't, right? And I think that what I found interesting is that I was reading an interview with the director, and he says like people tend to focus on like the rich and the middle and the poor, but he really wanted to hone in that it's like less about demonizing each of those levels and more about like you, the viewer, understanding that where you live in your life, whether you are like at the, let's say, more of the bottom, like you are, let's just say like you're a simple bureaucrat or you are a CEO, there's usually always people above you or below you, right, in your
Mm-hmm.
level. And to think about that versus think about all the time like, oh, there's people who have so much more than me, and there's also so many people who have so much less than me. Um, and how you treat the people above you and below you says a lot about our society. I thought that was pretty profound. I thought
Yeah.
that was a good way for the director to maybe help clarify, because I can see with
Well,
this movie.
it's how you're dealing with people in your own world, and if you're treating them like garbage, that's more a reflection on you.
Yeah, because I could see that. My sense from this interview, Alexis, was like, my sense was I think the movie was good, but I think even he in his mind was like, well, maybe our message wasn't as clear, because it seems like people are only taking like what they're taking away is, oh, this is our modern society, and like, oh my goodness, we need to fix it and stuff like that.
They're looking at it on the macro rather than the sort of micro of your own, what's going on around your world within the whole.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I think he was aware of the macro view of his movie, but I guess it's so easy to go macro all the time when it's hard to look in the mirror.
Well,
But I
even
think
him going macro, I think people are getting the wrong idea. I think he was being critical of all systems and more going to the core of human behavior.
exactly. I think he recognized, I think, in this interview that maybe they weren't very clear on that, and that he thought it would be a little more like.
A lot of people I had seen reviews have said, "Oh, this is just a complete critique of capitalism and call for socialism." Where in reality, I think he was trying to have commentary and criticize all systems, really.
Yeah, because they're like I said, I like when they forcibly redistributed that food. I thought that was a nod towards like what a lot of people who are
how they sort of shift and how it goes through a lot of violence. And two, I think they thought that people at the top were just horrible pigs, but then you see the brutality of as they were going from lower levels, and they were horrified by some of the things they saw at even the lower levels of society.
Yeah, because my reading and interpretation, and also getting extra information, is that like I think the creative team behind this film was really trying to hone in on like you said, like the human message of how we interact. Like I said, people below you, or even just one level above or below, says a lot about who we are and also our culture. And like you said, with it was a critique maybe on. You're right. It was a critique on a lot of ideas, because when they redistribute that food, they have to make that compromise that they can't just like tell people nicely. They have to use force, because once you get, like you said, certain levels below, it just becomes very barbaric, right? And so they have to use force to control, because otherwise it's just a free for all stabbing session.
Yeah, I mean, they killed a lot of people to make that possible.
Yeah, and so because I think this movie recognizes, I think more than maybe some people on the progressive left do in today's society, that most people, especially in the environments they come from, are not going to be all this altruistic kumbaya, let's all share, right? There's going to be those who are going to like take what they need, because they've been in such desperate situations that they only see, like, they see, oh look, we're getting a little bit, I need to take it before everybody else does,
Yeah.
If I don't eat, he's going to eat, right? So it's that kind of desperation that I think the bureaucrat. That's why I liked her character too, the Imoguri, because she comes in,
represented the naivety.
yeah, and also like how they think the system can just be tweaked. I think that's what she represented really, is that this happens a lot with bureaucrats, where like, oh, we just tweak this rule, we just change this one thing, it will make it better. If you like, remember her early point is like, if you just eat what you need to eat, you'll be fine.
Everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah, but what she didn't know was that there's more than 200. There's even more than 250, and she probably never seen the world that below. I forgot what level below. Like, it seems like it was a different world. They do a lot of skips, but let's say after level like 100, there's
no food left, really.
You start realizing this is not the society that you think it is.
Yeah.
These aren't just people like starving and dying. These are people now eating each other and stuff.
I did like the other idea of randomizing the floors, because it kind of shows that oftentimes you just luck into like where you're born in society. You like, you could say it's sort of merit based or not, but like, you just being born into like this level or that has nothing to do with you. That was just a circumstance to which you were brought into this world. So I kind of like that, showing that's something that you just can't control.
Yeah. I do like the randomization also, to show the fact that like, depending on what level you're at, it affected, even if you were like in the lower level and you move up to the higher level, it did affect how you even behave, right? You didn't just jump and start like attacking, right? Because I think a good example of this is the Chumagatsu, where remember like his first interaction, because they're in the middle, he knew that he had enough to eat,
Mm-hmm.
and like he would have the conversation, and he tried to make friends, he befriended Goran and stuff. But as soon as his life was a bit in danger, which he had experienced, he knew, he tied him up like you mentioned earlier, and he tried to reason with saying like, look, I have to eat some of your leg because like look, I need to survive,
Mm-hmm.
So look, just on the fact that what level he was at, his behavior with his partner changed.
You know how you were talking about the horror? One of the scenes that like horrified me was he's like, "Don't worry." He's like, "I'll give you some of yourself to eat too." And I was just like, "Oh my god, self cannibalization!" That was just because he was trying to be nice to him, but that concept was horrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was going to be painful. Like everybody knows that flesh wounds in general are painful. So
Whew.
yeah, he was going to cut out a certain part. I was just like, oh man, like this is getting really dark here.
Real quick. I did love his character though, Tramagasi, because he just represents the sort of ruthlessness.
He's the
I
most
think
powerful character, right? He's
what?
the one that's trying to he's trying to walk that line of like
It's pure survival.
I don't want to just kill you, but we have to make those practical decisions.
You can say that too, but what he doesn't get is he's very short term, and I think he's very jaded by being in the system for so long, because he's literally doing to like other people on other floors what has probably been done to him, not thinking that he could end up on the next month on a floor below them, and so they can be treating him like garbage again. So there's one scene where he just decides to pee on the floors below him. And I was like, man, that's just a sort of brutal realization or like brutal scene, because it just shows how some people, how he's saying, how do you treat the people below you or above you? That just goes to show how really terrible of a person he kind of is, despite being sort of jaded, because he literally pees on the people right below him.
Yeah, that was yeah, I remember that scene, and it messes up the food too, because
it's got urine on it.
Yeah, the scene that I thought was really like, I think it said a lot about a critique of a society today is like when the Baharat is trying to go up to the top to send, he was trying to, before he did the girl thing, right? He was going to send the message himself, like, hey, what's going on here? And the people above are like, I guess a lot of people let him like climb the rope, right? Because he throws the rope up, and they just say, oh yeah, come up, just don't like kill us or eat our food, right? And he's genuine in the fact that he doesn't want to disturb them. He just wants to get to the top, and then he gets closer and closer. He passes Goran's floor. They let him up, but then he wants to go, to that couple, right? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. And then they just like,
they poop on him.
They F with him basically. Yeah. He's almost there, and then they basically push him down.
Yeah.
And they thought it was a good joke. I thought that was a good representation, I thought, of like how sometimes the entities of society that say they're very like what's the term, like they're very giving and they're benefactors, like they're really not, like they're really there to make themselves look good, or they think it's such a joke that like, oh whatever, these guys just they're a waste of space. And you see this a lot with other media too, but like I thought that was a quick short scene that like really emphasized like how we when you're such a cynical actor, you can even help co-opt the system because you don't think it can change, or you're just there to like you're so cynical yourself that you don't have morality, or you don't even, like I said, think long term. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of little scenes in this movie that I thought were pretty like poignant,
profound.
And I think it was, you can tell that they were really trying to tell a story about like people versus like, I think like you said, like the bigger picture. I think that's why they wanted to use that allegory, because it's easy to say, oh, capitalism bad, and I think that's the superficial interpretation. But I think it's really about like how people treat each other. Like
the other thing that just kind of cracked me up, and this is just kind of a shot at bureaucracy as a whole, was even what they called the colloquially the space that they are in is referred to as the pit by people who are in in this vertical building, right? But to the bureaucrats from the outside, they refer to it as the vertical self-management center. It always cracks me up because it's kind of a shot at how people sort of just call things as they are, whereas bureaucrats have to sort of use specific language to make it seem less bad than it really is. And when I sort of heard that, it kind of reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever seen the George Carlin bit, although I think I've shared it with you before, where he talks about euphemisms and euphemistic language. That really was sort of like a shot to me, because his sort of point in his comedy special decades ago was how oftentimes we sort of try to desensitize our language to try to make something seem not as bad as it really is. And
Yeah,
I think that's what bureaucracy tends to do very well.
To your point, it's what I label as technocratic speak, because like it's something that you see often even in corporate culture, right? Like why is our, or at least where like I, potentially I work, we have like policies, like what's our de-escalation policies? Like what? Like, oh, what you really talk about is like what's our HR violation policy for like what's offensive, what's not. But
de-escalation, I love that language.
Policy, yeah, but to your point, it's like this is what we live with, right? It's actual, and there's probably many other examples, right? But
there's tons.
There's tons of examples of, like you said, of what you said, bureaucratic speak, as we would say, of basically what you and I would just say, like, oh, this is just like, normal code of conduct, right? But no, we need to have terms like de-escalation policy and other things, and you're right. You wonder why we're using this language at times, because it almost seems like we want to make it either sound more legitimate, or is it because like, we want to, like you said, like
they're trying to make it sound less brutal than the reality actually is.
Exactly, right. It's probably another topic we can get into, but yeah, I thought that was like, it was interesting because the people inside who are in that brutal, they just call it like
there's the pit,
the hole, whatever.
The pit. And you're not going to find anyone in that system who's going to call it the vertical self-management center.
Yeah, like, come on. But I think we see this with our own lives, right? Like, why do we, some people say prisons or the joint or whatever, but when you talk to bureaucrats, they say, oh, you're going to
rehabilitation centers.
No, well, they say
that's the one I love.
Yeah, they say correctional facilities. Yeah, it's like, why are we saying this? Like, does this make you feel better at night? Like,
I mean, there's tons and tons of examples about this. Here, the best one that Carlin had, and this special was in the 80s, and it's still so relevant today, was even the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD. Do you know what it was originally called?
Yeah, shell shock. I've seen this clip.
Yeah. All right, that was the most poignant one.
Yeah, it used to be shell shock, or there used to be some other terms, but now it's like, yeah, PTSD, post-traumatic stress.
Oh, the other one was eventually it went through several iterations where it went shell shock, and eventually it became operational exhaustion, and then PTSD.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's we see this with I think definitely in the last like 25 years, we've definitely seen an evolution of like a vernacular where
it's gotten worse.
They try to make it sound very like academic, professional, but really they're saying the same things that people have felt for a long time, or they've gone through for a long time, right? Like there was probably previous language that covered those things, and now it's very like concise, right? Like, like
it's one of the best ones he had. This is more in the military. Is like was that contract killers are referred to as freedom fighters, and his whole punchline was like, well, if crime fighters fight crime, firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight?
Yeah. I mean, the one that's we definitely lived with, because we grew up in the post 9/11 world, is like now they use it still today, right? Enhanced interrogation. Like, enhanced interrogation, or are we talking torture? Like, it's pretty much, we know
it's torture. But that's CIA speak.
Yeah, but they want to make sure. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it's a bureaucratic speak of like, oh, we're going to use enhanced interrogation techniques. Like,
that's PR speak, is what that is.
Yeah, and we don't do torture. We do enhance. I remember that congressional hearing. Like, well, we do enhanced interrogation. I was like, what?
Yeah, you know exactly what that is. And on a less, I guess, serious note, but still like kind of silly, we've had discussion of like, even in tech speak, when they talk about, like software as a service, it's all of that new lingo of sort of synergy. It's like, well, what does that really mean? It's like saying things without really saying anything.
Oh, the new one I learned of is the circle of safety.
I've not heard this one. Please elaborate a bit.
Yeah, so this is a concept where I think a lot of business leaders are using now, where honestly, so the analogy they take is from either military or animal kingdom stuff where, and this is, it makes sense, but I don't know why they have to use the term circle of safety. But in a team, right, you want to form trust, right? Like you have the external pressures of the opponent and like a society or whatever. But within the team, people want to feel like they can communicate. It's like safe spaces in a sense.
It's a safe space. Yeah, that's what it is.
With safe spaces, that term, that's because like people want to be able to, that's more used for like, I want to vent or talk about my issues with race, society, stuff, right? This is really for the team dynamic because this is a business book, right? So the circle of safety is so that like, a team can march forward. And they took this from the military, right? So the whole analogy starts with the fact that when Marines go to one of the camps, right, in the West Coast or East Coast and get developed and, become soldiers, right? Any Marine that graduates, even if you don't know that Marine, he went through the same training and stuff. And so like, that he's on your team, you don't have to worry about him doing his job, but more about like what the unit is facing. And that's when the term came around for, I guess, business leaders hijacked it.
Of course.
They didn't have a term, but they said like, oh, you want to form these teams, Marine Corps basically, that within each other, they have all the skills they need to accomplish tasks. And within that team, they have their circle of safety because they can trust each other to execute. They don't have to worry about this Marine, like he's totally like bad at his job, right? He's gone through the same regimen and stuff.
Just call it what it is. You want your team members to be competent.
Yeah, so like I'm thinking, like, okay, why do we have this new term? Like, do you need to sell more books or something?
Oh yeah, dude.
So, but yeah, like like just to end it on that, like it's so obvious that we maybe to make books or just to sound smart, they regurgitate.
I mean, they say like a lot of my criticisms of sort of the business world or like bureaucrats in general is they just say things that really don't say anything. It's like political slogans are the same.
Yeah.
Same thing. And people are like, wow, I like that. It's like they're not really saying anything, dude.
They're not. That's the key. Like the circle of safety, if you didn't know like the context, would that mean anything to people? No.
No.
What does that even mean?
It doesn't mean anything.
I have to give this long.
We can take other shots too, but we're not going to go there.
Yeah, I have to take this. I have to say this long-winded explanation just to say that they just want your teams to be like Marine Corps. Okay, great.
Yeah. Just say you want to foster competence, man.
Yeah,
and you don't want to have to. You don't want to question, have anyone question anybody else's competence. That's it.
Basically, the team, what they really want to say is they just want a strong team. I just don't know why they can't just say that. That makes sense to people. I want a strong team.
Yeah, because they like catchphrases, dude, that don't really say anything.
Yeah, it's just like one of my favorites, disrupt. What does that even mean?
Disrupt, bro. Oh yeah, that's startup speak.
Yeah, disrupt, dude. Oh, lean. You gotta be lean. Agile.
Yeah.
You gotta be lean and agile. Who doesn't like that speak? But anyways, yeah, that's just to recap that. Like in the movie, it does a little like I think it's a little snarky joke. I'm like, these terms mean nothing. You're just putting fancy terms together.
Yeah, they said they were trying to take a little shot at that. It was subtle but very good. Sorry, we got off on a tangent there. But I did like Thromagassi's character in general. Like I thought his acting was phenomenal in his role here, and I really liked how the main character would ask him questions, and he would always end it in "es obvio." It's obvious, and he's like, "Why do you keep asking me es obvio?" And he's like, "You'll pick this up, es obvio." And like for some reason that sort of condescension, like I just found that hilarious and yet horrifying at the same time. I don't know. And that's where I was like, wow, this is good acting.
Yeah, like his character was definitely like one of the more nihilistic ones, and
incredibly nihilistic.
What I thought was really interesting is like you said that like, he was basically treating Goran like a moron because he was like, why are you asking me this? It's going to be so obvious. But what's interesting is that as Goran goes through the story, it does start becoming very obvious to him, and he starts seeing the harsher realities that he has to survive with.
Sure.
Right. Even when he's dead, right, he's still talking to him in his mind, right? I find that to be really good too. Those scenes, and even at the end where he tells him like, you're not going out, dude. It's over for you. I was just like, oh, it's so good. Like he already died a long time ago.
Yeah.
By the way, there was an interesting interpretation of the movie I read was that part of it at one point deviates away from the world of reality, and it's really all like in Goran's head potentially as he's dying, maybe or whatever. Because remember, there's that scene in the beginning or towards the beginning where the chef is yelling at the other cooks. Remember?
Yeah.
People think that like some people have the interpretation that I'm
Was
pretty
he
sure.
yelling because there was a piece of hair?
Yeah, that's what it. So hear me out. Let me finish. This is
Okay,
I'm pretty sure
I
you're
have a
talking.
different interpretation,
Yeah,
but okay.
so people tend to think that they did get the dessert up, but it's not supposed to come up, right? And so he thinks like it was because of a hair or whatever, but it's probably not. And the chef doesn't get that it's the message, and he's just like just pissed off at the other workers, and like they start again, meaning like maybe the message is useless. It was an interesting interpretation. I
It
don't
could
fully
be.
agree with it, but I like that like outside the box thinking. You know?
I think the hair signifies that the girl made it to the top.
Interesting. I didn't think of that. The That's a good one. Yeah, maybe. But then where she? I guess did she make it to the top or?
We don't know, but I think that's a subtle hint that she did.
Interesting. Yeah, because I do think where I do agree with that interpretation is I do think that some of those other scenes they seem random. They just might be happening out of order. You know.
Maybe
Right.
I'm not so sure. I tend to think that it's not necessarily in his head. Really, where I think, and this is an interpretation that I kind of, because you're like thinking, right? Like, what is with this little girl? What are they like trying to say? Really, for one, she's at the bottom floor. I think that's significant, right? Partly because I think that as you're going to the bottom, right, you're tending to see a lot of the horrors of society and show up in a big way. A lot of murder, like people just acting brutally. And I think that's sort of showing the lower depths, the more horrifying depths of sort of like human psychology as a whole. But on another level, I think that the girl being at the lowest floor sort of shows that she's at the bottom of society. Sort of our most vulnerable are at the bottom of society, and we tend to forget about them in a way. I think that's partly what they were trying to show with that. And I think that them trying to send her on the platform of going to the top is trying to show that it's always we always place hope with the younger society is going to do better than, or the younger generation is going to do better than we have previously done. That's at least the hope, and I think that little girl sort of symbolizes the hope that those two have that we sort of place on the younger generation.
Yeah, and that's one of my gripes with the movie is that I thought that was too cliche. And if you look at enough history, the next generation isn't always better off than the
Yeah,
previous.
I don't think that they're saying it is. It's just, dude, it's the hope that they are. Will they
Yeah,
be? I think the film gives plenty of hints that it's not. It's misplaced hope.
yeah. I think what I like about the interpretation I read on that forum was like, that in the end, like, because the system is so rigid and also how people are pretty fixed, unless something really, really like
Earth shattering happens.
earth shattering, that's the right word, earth shattering occurs, it's still the next generation is still somewhat trapped by the previous.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that like I think this is like society, but I think we also see this with I've been, as everyone knows on the podcast, I like to, think ahead for the episodes. I've been watching some films where you see that the family dynamics from the parent to child to even maybe grandchild, there is this lineage, and it's not so easy to disrupt family patterns at times. And I think our audience could definitely like
I think a lot
react
of people can relate to that.
relate to that, right, in general. And I think, it's interesting how we don't sometimes extrapolate that to our society because we see that there's a lot of issues that we've had that are really multi-generational, right? Many iterations of presidents, congressional, senates, or et cetera, have faced basically a lot of the same problems. Maybe made it worse at times, maybe made it better, but it's been like a journey, not like a quick fix or a set of quick, nice three policies that got really made things improve, right? It's like you inherit all the baggage in a way, right? For right or not your choice, like you're saying when you're born, of the circumstances and of the legacy you were left, and
Yep.
it's up to you to make maybe that incremental 1%, 2% change, which is brutal, right? It could be really a big effort. That's the one thing I did maybe take away from the movie that like maybe they were like I said it was the hope, but like if they could just make things better at 1%, they were going to roll the dice. That's why I think the characters were heroic, at least the Goran and Barharat, because they didn't know if it was going to work, right? But they rolled the dice, and they were like, you know what, we might as well roll the dice and do nothing, or just be just think that nothing makes a difference. So I do think that message in the movie I did like. The whole, children be the future, I did think it was like a kind of cliche, and I was like, you could have done it a bit differently, but
yeah, but I don't. So I think that's just them saying that that's what any generation hopes for, but I don't necessarily think that they thought that was going to be the case, right? I think most people sort of hold that view. It's like a hope for the next generation.
Yeah.
So I guess so related to the film, but we've kind of discussed a lot of the elements of it. I wanted to ask you, since you do have some connection to this, why do you think that this? Obviously, this is a Spanish-based film. Does this have any connection to what's going on in Spain today?
Well, I think a lot of the movies that we've been covering have a lot of connections to the modern society. I think
no, not just modern society. I want to because this is a Basque-produced film.
Yeah, I think.
Do you think anything that's going on there currently sort of inspired the making of this film?
I think it's very obvious it has, and I think you see this with the Don Quixote book. I think you see that like once again, Spanish society is a bit of a crisis, right? You have high youth unemployment. You have a very, I mean, one could argue even Washington is corrupt too, but Madrid is corrupt as well. But not to do too deep a dive of a history lesson here for modern people, there are issues with modern Spanish culture. Nobody talks about them enough. I think like first most, like people forget that like the modern Spanish Constitution, it's only been around since the 70s, right? And there's a well-known, like I think some historian or somebody said that like the first two generations of a republic is critical, right? Because underneath that, right, you still have the same people that were living through it, potentially having grievances or having issues with it and wanting to reform it. But stability in law is very important, as we well know, right? And there were many issues that were not addressed in that. Also, at the same time, right, we had this era of globalization, also the consolidation of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And then now, you've had some recent constitutional crisis, right? Like you had the Catalan referendum. That's still controversial. You still have what happened with Podemos, with a new party basically being super leftist. You've had a lot of political transformations, even with the rise of the far right, Vox, which, by the way, is a little story about Vox that I think will be kind of related here. But in general, you have all these issues, right? And you have the issues of this economic anxiety, right? I think that's pervasive with a lot of movies we've covered recently too that deal with that, right? That something's not working, right? Why is it that like only certain people are really flourishing in our society, and everybody else is either depressed, on drugs? Like when I say on drugs, I mean like Xanax, like those.
Well, any type of
any type of thing. Not just like I just want to clarify because most people think of drugs, I think of heroin and meth, which is still an issue. But people who are just on helpers just to get through their anxieties of society, like their lives.
Look, even here, I mean, there's a prevalence in certain areas of people drinking lean, man, which is just cough syrup and Sprite.
Exactly. So you have all these like issues, and people are looking for answers. And I think a lot of these types of movies they connect with the society, but I think they're also seeing this global trend of, look, I'm gonna little tangent here in a second that I think certain people are realizing, and I think this is coming really from some progressives. A lot of the people who are having these anxieties, especially let's say in the lower working class, that the difference between like let's say the American worker who used to work at GM or working at Dollar General, and this life story of someone who doesn't even speak their language, maybe that's from maybe parts of Mexico or Central America, they actually have more in common with the struggles they face than maybe the suburban house soccer mom that lives in the suburbs of Philly or the suburbs of Raleigh. And I think some people are having those connections because, yes, the political rhetoric is, oh, these people that don't speak English or Spanish are the enemy and they, blah, blah, blah. But, they've heard this before, right? They've heard these arguments before for many decades, right? And they're starting to see that, like, nothing's really changed for us. So what's really the issue here? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not so different than these guys that are coming from a foreign country, that really I have more differences with people who are living in DC maybe, and they're not really like they understand my life at all.
The elites.
Yeah, and I think that's happening in Spain too, where you have people who are like, well, I do these politicians or executives really understand my life struggles. And specifically with Spain, the issue is, especially with the European Union, is that like they've given up some sovereignty to the collective, and now they're questioning if they can have this sovereignty. Here's a prime example. There was a recent impeachment of the political party in Spain. That's the majority government, which is I'm going to call them for American audience, they're our version of our Democrats. And their version of Republicans were invited to join the impeachment because they're the right party. And the far right party was doing the impeachment. They expect, right, because political expedience, right? They're like, okay, these guys are not going to side with the established party because, you know, they're trying to win next time, right? And so the far right made the gamble that like these guys will join us and we'll move it to the right, all the stuff that like certain people dream of. What ended up happening, which is this shows you how the system works, is that they actually supported their version of the Democrats. They call them the PSOE, and they supported them because it came out that like the argument they had to them was, hey, you know, you think the EU and Merkel is going to allow you to basically delegitimize a government that was elected dutifully? Mm-hmm. And they were like, yeah, but like if we, you know, we're in a tough spot. If we side with you, we look like we're not really the right-wing party. Right. And if we side with you, yeah, we know that Merkel's going to give me a phone call and say, hey, what are you doing? You think this is going to be allowed? So what they decided to do was good political theater. They denounced Vox and said, like, you're undermining democracy, the rule of law, all the stuff that they don't really care
Sounds
about.
Familiar.
Yeah, and so they have to find this weird middle path to stay legitimate, but also not challenge the power. And I think, I'm not saying like the far right has an argument, but I think people are starting to realize that, wait a second here, what's going on here? Like, so you're basically, are you the government? Are you the party for our people, or you're the party for this global power broker game, right? And I think people in America have the same questions too. Like, are these people helping us? Or are they just helping transnational corporations that make trades all over the world, right? In Europe and in Asia and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, I think this film has a lot of connections with Spain specifically, but I think it's a bigger connection. I think this is why,
like, I guess what I was asking is, like, this was a movie that was produced by Best Film Production Studio, so it obviously had to hit home a little bit for them, I would imagine. Much like I would say, like, it would be fitting if this type of film was made here in the U.S. And I could see why it would. You
have to remember, with like, at least with a lot of Basque culture, they do view themselves. It's what they always say about, like, I mean, you know this too, like when immigrants come to America, they like to have that outsider's perspective. I think the Basque, more than the Catalans, have always internalized that they are still a little bit as the outsiders. So they are critiquing, I think, the country they're part of. But you have to remember that with Basque, a lot of Basque intellectuals.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay. So not just Spain, right? I would say Basque society then.
Yeah, with Basque society, it is. I think the class thing is always true. I will say that, like, they have, if Basque society wanted to take some real introspective, they would have done some other things in the movie, but because this is what I'm saying is my point, is that, like, I think they love to basically demonize the Spanish establishment, which is fair game, but I don't think always they do a good job with introspection. And they didn't want to, obviously this movie was just about certain topics, but in general, I haven't seen too much media of like deep introspection. It reminds me, so a little bit off topic, but I finished a book recently called Say Nothing, which is a story about the IRA and Sinn Féin. I'm not going to say my opinions about either one of them. But what I will say is that book opened my eyes to the fact that it's very hard for people who believe in a cause they believe is so just, Irish nationalism, to rationalize the dark deeds they've done for that cause. That book is like, it's a really good book.
It's tough for them to rationalize that, or it's easier for them to rationalize.
So what I give the book a lot of credit is that it touches on the stories of those who are able to still drink the Kool-Aid, as I would say, and move on. But I found it really profound, the stories of people who can't, that they died with drug addiction or alcoholism, because when they realized they've done all this stuff just to still have what they have, right? The Good Friday Agreement. They were basically a lot of these people were telling themselves is everything will be worth it once we have a united Ireland. If we
Mhm.
get there, all the people that I've hurt, killed, all the people that I've demonized, it'll be worth it. But they obviously we live in today's society. It didn't happen, right? There was the compromise in the 1990s. It was hard for those people to accept that and to move on and to realize that their whole lives that they're going to be in prison maybe forever or all the things they've done, like all the bad things they've done. Like most people don't go in our society or don't grow up in our modern societies thinking they're going to execute people, right? I know you and I didn't grow up at 15 thinking that we're going to shoot people in the back of the head. Um, so I think,
No, and that's something to be said for the U.S. We don't have that level of instability that other countries do.
and relating it back to that, like you said, that what's happening in Spain, there were still a lot of traumas. I was referencing it earlier that there's still a lot of traumas that have like they have existed since like the 70s, 80s, like all the decades through that have just not been, especially in the Bass story, that has not been truly reconciled. There's been some reconciliation, but the reality is that there's still a lot of unsaid things.
Sure.
I think the Irish story and the Bass story are actually very very close in this regard. And I would like I think there's still a lot of media. I think there's a lot of room for exploration there, actually, for literature and for just media and conversation. Because I think what has happened with the Basque Country is what happened with Ireland, that they tried to say this is over now. We're going to separate the past, but there are people who are still alive that lived through that, and they're like, what do you mean? This is not a reconciliation. This is just so think about this. This is a story that I always reiterate to people that there are people who have gone out of jail finally because of they've been pushing legally to let these people out of jail that were involved in atrocities, right? And these people who, and the Basque Country is small, right? So there's villages, right? There's people who have to see these people, basically people who maybe killed their mother or their family member in the street. Maybe they don't say hi, but they have to see them, right? That has to be a unique experience, right? Like, it's not like something that happens every day, like, oh, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know if you ever, like, or that much about the events that took place in Rwanda in the mid-90s, but there was mass genocide where I think 1.5 million people were killed in 3 months there, something like that. Like, it was brutal event. But then society kind of moved on, and I can't imagine seeing it like, and I'm sure there were a lot of cases of people who like saw their neighbors who had killed some of their family members. That must have been insanely brutal.
Yeah. So I'll do a little plug for people who are interested in this kind of topics. There was issues with this book / HBO series, but on the whole, I'm gonna just say it just to give it a little color. There is an HBO series called Patria that is, I would say, on balance, okay. I personally saw some issues with it, but it does a better job than most, kind of tackling those issues of because I think we always look at history in the textbook, right? Like, that's why I like the book. I definitely recommend the book Say Nothing. I think that's the title. Because we tend to focus on like history as like the textbook pages and the big events and like, oh, Thatcher negotiated with the IRA and Jerry Adams. But I think sometimes we get lost in the everyday stories of people who were caught into this, right? Yeah, there's the bigger picture, but there's the everyday life of people who sacrificed a lot or really did believe in something or did certain things because they believed in a certain political ideology, and the realization that they have to live with that. Like when you're young, you think the world is like your oyster, but when you're like at the end of your life and you realize, wait, I shot that guy, I killed that dude, I stole that, I basically did everything I could for the cause. It happens probably with people who like or in the militaries too, right? Like I did all this for my country. Now wait a second, I don't get any benefits. They treat me like garbage. I'm having issues. I can't get the medical insurance. Like you start having these hard reality checks, and I think this is something that's just not discussed enough. At least in Europe, this stuff is not discussed enough. I think American literature has done a lot with like movies and stuff of like.
Oh, especially Vietnam veterans. Yeah.
Yeah, but we may not do anything politically, but we do have a lot of literature, right? But I think, but yeah, it's definitely a good topic to explore. I don't have nothing in the bull. I have one thing in the bullpen about Ireland around this, but that's going to be a while.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that point, I think what was interesting as you're like talking about that, you got to wonder, and they didn't really delve into this with this movie, but I think it's after 5 months people get out. You got to wonder how they cope with like some of the things that they had to internalize that they had to do to survive within the pit.
Yeah, the trauma of that, right? Yeah, that's another like that would have been a good also like I don't know if they could have shown that, but it would have been a good maybe like they had some dialogue, especially with the bureaucrat, because there's probably people who have come out, or maybe nobody comes out, right? That's another thing. But anyways, that was a little side tangent, but yes, I do think there's a lot of connections with what's going on in that country that's potentially going to fall apart.
Mhm.
And the film, and I think what you see at least with a lot of these films that deal with class, and we'll have one more, I believe, next week that I'm taking the break that I keep mentioning. Um,
Well, I think
but
it's two, right? I think even the Mexican film deals with class to an extent too.
it does, but it's not like the.
It's not like this.
Yes,
It's
it's
not
not
like
like
this.
this, and it's not like the next one either. But yeah, so we'll be able to talk. Oh, that's gonna be another long. I have some tangents for that one, dude. Yeah, yeah, that's gonna be. See, this one I was able to say professionally because it's the truth, right? As somebody who is knows of the world and has studied like Irish history and Basque history,
Yeah.
I'm able to still stand as an outsider. I will say that when we
Not
get to
now in Mexico.
when we get to that one, that's gonna be like I have an opinion. But it's also interesting to be like that also even how I just spoke of this issue, right? Like it's easy to be like outsider versus insider. There is a difference in perspective. So I'm not saying I'm an insider per se because I didn't actually grow up in Mexico, but I know of that world a bit.
We have a lot more ties
I
to that
didn't.
world.
I lived in the Basque Country for for our audience. I lived in the Basque Country for basically 2 years as a child. So I didn't get to. I didn't as a child. You don't really process all the adult realities. But yes, you did sense that. Like I just remember like it was dangerous to even walk across the Basque the terrorist organizations ETA's graffiti because you didn't want to be associated because you didn't want the police to start asking questions, right? But still, you're an outsider, right? You're not of that world, right? Like I learned about why they were struggling, just like I learned about how the Irish are struggling. But it's different when you know a bit more. Like for all we're gonna we'll tip our hand. We're gonna be covering a movie that takes place right before the Mexican Revolution, and just for everybody to know, my great uncle. So my grandfather's uncle fought the revolution. So I'm just, the political climate in Mexico at the time was.
It will be an interesting discussion, but anyway, we'll get there in 2 weeks. But anyway, so going back to this film, yeah, I thought just overall, I thought this was a really good film. I thought the acting was good from the main character from Gordon. I really liked Trimagasi, as you know. Like I thought his character, he may have been the best acted character in this film.
I thought he was the best character. Gordon was a good protagonist, but Trimagasi was like.
Trimagasi was that nihilistic villain.
Dude. All his scenes are good, dude.
Yeah,
I'm glad that they wove him in the ending because I was just like, this guy was the best character in the movie. So
yeah, they really every scene he's in really brought an extra element, an extra layer there, and so I'll give credit to the acting as well as the writing of the film for that. I thought the concept was super unique. I thought that there were a lot of like subtle hints and criticisms at really society as a whole, and more just I guess at the personal level, just within human nature. And so, yeah, I was pretty impressed overall with this film. And I thought, this was a horror film, not in the sense of, your traditional jump scares, but just within the setting and the environment itself it was a horror setting, right? So I think they did a good job setting the stage overall with that. Yeah, do you have anything else you want to add? We get into ratings.
Yeah, I think with this film, I did enjoy it. I think it's a good film. I did recommend it to family members, and they had
their own takes.
Yeah, I mean, I need to ask my stepdad what his take was, but at least with my siblings and my mother, they had more of our takes. I kind of I was so off the wall that I kind of forgot what my stepdad's take was. But I'm telling you, best people don't want to have some self introspection. So, but what's interesting with this film is that I thought like the Goran and Trimagasi was the stronger characters. Even Bahara, I liked him. I will say that like the bureaucrat, I thought she did well too. Nothing wrong with the cast. I guess there was no like other than his Trimagasi's performance, I didn't feel over. None of the other performance, all the other performances were good, but nothing was like blowing my mind away.
I thought Goran's was probably on that second tier, right below Trimagasi.
That's what I mean. Like I think everyone else was into that.
No, I thought everyone else was good, but they were kind of forgettable. I thought Trimagasi was just like stole the movie, and then Goran was still memorable.
Yeah, like he was solid.
He was good.
I
It
wasn't
was
like
good.
blown away though, but maybe because it's a hard comparison because of like who he's in the movie with, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I will say that, and I will say I thought the setting was unique. I like the concept. Yeah, this movie was like a
It
very
was
solid.
about setting and tone. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, in that sense, it was a really good movie. Yeah, yeah, we can get into ratings if you want.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so for this film, I'm going with an 8 out of 10. The reason I'm going with 8 out of 10 is we've had a lot of movies that discuss class, anxiety, human nature. I like the allegory, but my thing now where I'm kind of like I would like to be more. I want to dig deeper in a movie. So this movie does have its depths, but it's nothing like some of the other ones we've covered around social and class anxiety. And I think the movie, as good as it was, like you said, there's only one character that has like that transcendent performance. Everybody else is really solid, and everybody knows my range, right? Like to get into that 9 range, you have to be like elite, special. But it's better than what I would consider like a normal like okay movie, which is like a 6, 5.5 to 6. So I think eight's a really high score for me, and I think it's worth the merit. I think everybody I've recommended the movie to, they liked it. Maybe they've gone too simplistic to some of the allegory analogies, but I do think it's a good movie. Recommend it, and definitely like we've had this trend with some of these issues with class and society. Fits in that narrative, and good movie actually. I mean, I enjoyed watching. I know you did too. So
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot that I can really complain about. I thought they did a good job with the concept was super unique. I know a lot of people made comparisons with another movie that has a cult following called The Cube, which I saw. I was a little kid, I think, when I saw that, or like in middle school. Um, but this is obviously a much more refined script than The Cube was. The Cube was kind of all over the place from what I remember. Uh, and I thought, obviously we just talked about Trimagasi was great. He was really one of those like characters that kind of sticks out with you. Not quite on that. I don't know how well I would have rated this film without if anyone else was playing the character, unlike Trimagasi. I think he brought that to like the next level film, kind of in the same way where I thought another really good comparison to me was in American History X, where Norton was like really made that film. All the others were good, but they were nowhere near on the same ballpark as his performance to me. Yeah, and so like a lot of the other characters are kind of forgettable in a way to me, and I think that was partly like my big knock on the movie. Not that they were bad; it's just there was nothing that really stuck out aside from Goren, and for that reason, I kind of gave this film an 8.5. It was a little cliche in certain ways with some of the messaging they were trying to get across, and I thought they could have done or delved into some of the things like how they had flashbacks of people entering the for some of the interviews to enter the pit. I thought it would have been interesting if they had some flash forwards of some people who had lived out of the pit.
that's a good point. I
Something
didn't
like
think
that.
about that. I agree. That would have been an interesting dynamic because
I think that would have added an extra layer to the film.
you can't have that kind of trauma and just go back to society.
Yeah, if they had like a flash forward or something like that, I thought that probably would have broken into my 9 range. But
Yeah,
yeah, for this film as is, I would give it an 8.5.
yeah. I think people are probably you picked up. They're like, I really try to withhold the 9 range. I really
Yeah, I
got.
know, and I think that's sometimes I'm like, all right, but you just want to be that stupid, harsh critic that they kind of criticize in Birdman.
Oh yeah,
But
but
it is what it is.
the difference is that I didn't make a career being that snobbish. I think that's what Berman has a problem with. It like you don't do anything, and yet here you're giving me these really harsh critiques. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, they
What
kind of
book are you in?
and they insinuated that they're basically failed actors and they're bitter, and so they just are harsh their whole time in their criticism.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I tend to not be as harsh on you as you, but so occasionally I come off even more harsh than you do.
Yeah, I will say
It's
that
not that
there'll eventually be movies that I know that I really like that I'm gonna probably overrate. I think every I just think in general I just try to keep like myself balanced, but there will be a few movies where I just
well,
like
we'll see how that Mexican film comes because you sound very opinionated. I haven't finished it yet.
I took a break, but I need to watch the second half like next week. So I didn't realize. I thought we were watching that like after this one, but I was like, oh no, it's actually my pick, and then it's
Yeah,
you.
Florida.
So um,
Anyway, well, do you have any other final thoughts?
no, I highly encourage you. I mean, not, if you have a Netflix subscription, you can definitely watch it, and if you don't, it's a shame. Oh, a little, I guess, little joke is that like I mentioned it to you before, right? But it does slightly bother me still that Netflix keeps saying like it's a Netflix
All
original
right.
when it's clearly you just have the streaming rights. Stop saying that. Just stop doing that. Like you gotta stop playing it off. You didn't do anything for the production for this movie. You just
The one person I will give a shout out, since we didn't say this, was a Gaztelu Urrutia film.
I would just the other one Gaztelu Urrutia.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So I'll give a shout out for him because I've never seen any other films that he's directed. Apparently, he's done a lot of commercials in the past. But I will be very interested to see what projects he takes on in the future.
Yeah, this was like a good. So yeah, it seems like he's really just done short films and commercials. I mean, I would classify this as a directorial debut or close to it.
Yeah, they say it's his debut film.
Yeah, so for we've done a lot of debut films, and this is one of the more impressive ones, actually. So I mean,
I will say this was very ambitious.
Yes,
and he did a very good job of it.
Yeah,
but yeah, that I don't know who played which character am I thinking of? I don't know who played basically Goren's roommate, but man, that actor was impressive. I'm curious as to what other films he was in. Tramagasi.
That's true too. I have no idea.
I'm trying to look right now. Oh, Julior. It's like very Basque type names.
Well,
he's been around for a while.
That one doesn't look as Basque to me, but
Zorion.
That first name does, dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this guy's Basque as hell, dude. He even looks bad. I mean, I already know the look.
Yeah, he does look Basque.
Yeah, I don't really know what he's been in either. And what's interesting is that here another thing too is that like this shows you how IMDb is really a Hollywood focus. Because I've realized that there's a lot of movies that like are a bit more niche that we've done. This isn't this niche because it was on Netflix and 56 million people saw it, but in general, when you have like more niche like foreign directors or actors, their IMDb profiles are very sparse. It just maybe has where they lived or like where they were born.
Right.
I think it highlights that like there is an internal bias in our current, let's say, movie critique culture that focuses heavily on stuff that comes from LA and New York. So.
Yeah. Now this guy apparently had a lot of roles in television in the 90s and early 2000s.
That's what I imagined. The film industry, at least in the Basque region, isn't really like as prominent. They're really known for like TV series and stuff like that. So they usually air on public television like we do with PBS. So.
Yeah, well, anyway, I think that's it for this week. But if you liked our commentary on the platform and I guess social commentary in general, please like and subscribe to our channel. And stay tuned for next week's episode where we will be reviewing the Florida Project. So until next week, we'll see you later.